How do we actually install the Postgres adapter inside our Docker environment and make sure everything builds correctly? But before we begin, if you haven't watched the previous video where I explained the theoretical background of configuration Django with a Postgres database, please go back and watch that first.
In this lesson, we are going to install our PostgreSQL adapter inside the Docker environment. So open your project source code and let's begin by opening the Docker file. So what we are going to do is add a couple of dependencies that are required to install our psycopg2 package. So we will start by adding a new line here under the line 13. So it's going to be apk add update space no cache space PostgreSQL client space double and sign space backslash go to the new line apk space add space update space no cache space virtual space dot tmp build deps space backslash go to new line some space here and then build base space PostgreSQL dev space musl dev space double and sign space backslash. Then after we remove the temp file here, I'm going to add a new line, then apk space del space dot tmp build deps space double and sign space backslash. So on line 14, we use apk add to install the PostgreSQL client. This is the client package that needs to be included in our Alpine image to allow the psycopg2 package to connect to Postgres. It's a necessary dependency that must remain in the Docker image when running in production. And below that, on line 15, we added a new apk add command that looks similar to the first one, except it includes the virtual option. This option creates a virtual package named temp-build-deps, which groups the installed dependencies under the name. This allows us to easily remove these temporary build dependencies later in the Docker file. So below this line, we listed the packages required to install our Postgres adapter, which are build-base, PostgreSQL-dev, and musl-dev. And then below that, we finally install the packages defined in requirements.txt, and we'll be adding the psycopg2 package in a minute after I explain everything in this Docker file. So once we have done that, down here on line 19, we remove the temporary build dependencies. All this does is remove the packages we installed earlier on line 16. Since they were installed under the name temp-build-deps, we can remove them easily without having to list them individually later on. This helps keep the Docker file as lightweight as possible, ensuring it's clean and efficient when running in production. We avoid having unnecessary packages that aren't specifically needed for running our application. So that's all the changes inside our Docker file. So I'm going to save it. And next, we need to open up our requirement.txt and add a new line here. So I'm going to write psycopg2 greater than or equal 2.9.10, comma, less than 2.10. What this does is define our psycopg2 package inside our requirement.txt. So I save it, open the terminal, but before if you are working on Windows, you have to be sure that you have already run the Docker desktop on your system. So I'm going to write the command docker-compose space down to clear any of the containers, and then we'll type docker-compose space build. What this will do is rebuild our container by running the steps we have modified inside the Docker file. So it's going to install our psycopg2 dependency, and we'll see if that works in a moment. So you can see that our Docker file built successfully and we didn't get any error, and this means that we have successfully installed our psycopg2 package inside our Docker file. Now that we have installed our Postgres adapter, we can go ahead and configure our Django settings.py file to use our database. So we open up settings.py, that you can find it here. And then before configure our database, we are just going to add an import to the top of the file. So we are going to do import os, and this is going to be needed to pull the values from the environment variables that we are going to need next. Then we scroll down to the database section. So you can see we already have a default database configured. This comes with all the Django projects. It's basically the SQLite database. However, we're not going to use SQLite. We are going to remove these lines and then keep the default key, because this is the database configuration we will be updating for our setup, and you can actually configure multiple databases with Django, and we are going to add the following: engine colon, and then django.db.backends.postgresql, comma, then host colon os.environ.get db underscore host. Then I'm going to explain line by line. So name colon os.environ.get db underscore name user db underscore user, and finally password db underscore pass. So these are the settings we explained earlier, where we specify the engine. This is the string value that represents the database engine we want Django to use. This is defined in the Django documentation for setting up the database. Then we have host, which is the host name of the database. So these values here, db host, db name, db user, and db path, they match up inside our Docker Compose. So if I open it, you can see they match up to our environment name set here. So that's what we need to do to configure the database. One thing that we might want to do is remove the SQLite database that was created automatically. So you can find it here because we don't need this database anymore as we are using Postgres. And then we can move on to the next lesson.